Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Jawad Tehami. The curfew and the communication clampdown in Indian-occupied Kashmir has entered its 58th day today. The leader of the opposition in the Indian upper house of the parliament, Ghulam Nabi Azad, has made startling revelations about the situation there after his 6-day tour. He has said that there is fear and terror in the air. All the political leaders except those of BJP have been arrested, as all the guest houses and the hotels in the occupied valley have turned into prisons. Despite international censure and continuous offer for mediation by the US President Donald Trump, the BJP-led government in India hasn't taken even a step back from its belligerent posturing. Indian Union Minister Amit Shah has even blamed his own first Prime Minister, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, for having done a Himalayan blunder of internationalizing the Kashmir issue. Minister for External Affairs of India has also categorically rejected mediation offer by Mr. Trump. Pakistan's Prime Minister and many other world leaders have raised the Kashmir issue at the United Nations General Assembly during its 74th session. So to talk more about this, we are joined by Mr. Tariq Zamir, former ambassador, joining us from Islamabad, and Mr. Yasir Ahmed, Director of the South Asia Center for Peace and Human Rights from London. Thank you, both of you, for your time and being part of the show today. I would start with you, Mr. Zamir. Startling revelations by Ghulam Nabi Azad about situation in Kashmir. So voices coming from within India about grave humanitarian crisis unfolding in Kashmir. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, it's true that the situation is really grave because now it's completing its second month, this incarceration of the helpless Kashmiris in the largest concentration camp, if I may say, in human history. Secondly, other than, Mr. Azad's statement, which you have seen and we have seen, it's startling. And you might have also come across this report presented by the group of Indian women, which is an independent group, and incidentally, they are probably all of them are non-Muslims. They came up with this report that 13,000 Kashmiri youth has been abducted from their homes by the Indian security forces, and they have been, God knows, placed where. Now, the idea probably, and you would have also heard that Mr. Ajit Doval said that after this Modi visit to New York, he said that they should increase the level of violence by the security forces, should use more force. So it doesn't augur well, for the Kashmiris and for the region. The way the Indians are moving, they have become more belligerent, and despite it appears that the Indians have calculated that they were able to divert Mr. Trump's attention, whatever little attention he had, or his focus was there on the humanitarian crisis in Kashmir, because of this large-scale thing they had in Houston, which I must not say that it was a very large. It was just a stadium. They probably, this is their calculation. It appears that they were successful in sidestepping the whole issue. And now they can move forward because, UN General Assembly session and the visit to United States was a major thing where they came under pressure bilaterally, and also the Prime Minister's speech at the UN General Assembly, in which he proved to be the true ambassador of the Kashmiris that he has promised. They now probably see that, okay, they have gone through this major thing in New York, and they can now really increase the level of repression in Kashmir.
Mr. Zamir, as you have just mentioned, that they thought that they have just diverted the attention of US President Donald Trump as he participated in Howdy Moody rally in Houston. But that rally was slammed back in India, and there were voices coming from within India that it was a boastful propaganda with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi having a failed US tour.
Yeah, that's true. There has been a lot of criticism within India of all this tour because he was not able to bring back home some big news either on trade or on other issues. So certainly, because it was a show that was arranged by the NRIs, and this kind of show, any leader that goes there with a large community in the US, they can hold such shows. In that sense, it's not a big deal also. But what is really worrying is that given the RSS agenda of Nazism openly, they have been pleading Nazism since their inception, and now they are in the implementation stage of that thing.
Exactly. Mr. Zamir, I'll come back to you on this particular point, as Minister Imran Khan has also raised this issue at the United Nations General Assembly during his speech, the correlation of the RSS ideology with that of Nazis and fascists. Mr. Yasir, I'll come to you. Ghulam Nabi Azad has also said that economy of Jammu and Kashmir is not dependent on the economy of India, as it is very different, and it is being affected, particularly when we talk about tourism, handicrafts and fruits market. Is that what BJP government called as the development of the area, especially after the revocation of Article 370 and illegal annexation of Kashmir to India?
First of all, I would like to say Prime Minister Imran Khan, rightly at UNGA, he said that, the BJP-led Indian government, they are just riding on India being a big market and, and on Islamophobia. And he, exposed what the RSS, and he gave a good brief about, their history and the Hindutva mentality that they have. What I think right now needs to be done is Pakistan, they need to put diplomatic pressure on India around the world in all the major capitals. And the objective of it should be that the clampdown should be lifted. And, it correlates with your question about economy. If there is clampdown, Kashmir, it depends upon tourism, fruit industry, like everyone, businesses, everyone is struggling in Kashmir right now. Kashmir is in a chaos right now. And again, another thing, we need to prevent by our proactive diplomacy the repression and the genocide that is going to happen in Kashmir. And pressure needs to be put on India that they need to accept, the United Nations Security Council resolutions, and Kashmir dispute should be resolved in accordance with the United Nations Security Council resolution. And this needs to be, we need to be very firm about it, that Kashmiri's right to self-determination is non-negotiable. And, we will never ever negotiate on that right. That is our basic right. And, self-determination is in the Charter of United Nations, in the Charter of the United Nations. So,
Mr. Yasir Ghulam Nabi Azad also didn't reveal the names of all those people who shared with him the ground reality during his tour to the occupied valley. He expressed apprehensions about their safety and security. However, he said that he will share all those things which have been shared with him in his report to the Supreme Court. Do you see any action on the part of Supreme Court happening regarding the situation in Indian occupied Kashmir?
Well, I don't know if you saw Twitter yesterday. What was trending on Twitter was there was a lot of outrage. They have Indian Supreme Court, they haven't put Kashmir on agenda. Rather, they have put the Ayodhya and the Babri Mosque, case first. So there was a lot of anguish and anger on Twitter. And secondly, when you talk about Ghulam Nabi Azad, if you look at all the collaborators who've been part of the Indian machinery in Kashmir from last God know how many years, even they've been, booked under PSA. So obviously, Ghulam Nabi Azad, when he says like he does not want to name people who has given him all the information and about his sources, I think he's absolutely right. Because what India has done to its own people, the collaborators who've been running the show for them and who've been more, dangerous for Kashmiris in Kashmir from last 35, 40 years, he's right in saying that, he does not want to name them.
Okay, yes, Ms. Ghulam Nabi Azad has also mentioned yesterday during his press conference that all the leaders of all the political parties in Jammu as well as in Kashmir have been put under arrest, and only the BJP leadership is allowed to make their campaign in the region. Mr. Zamir, Indian Union Minister Amit Shah has even blamed on Prime Minister Nehru for having done a Himalayan blunder of having internationalizing the Kashmir issue by going to the UN. Has the BJP been stooped so low in the pursuit of its Hindutva ideology that its leaders are pointing fingers towards the founding fathers even?
You know, this shouldn't come as a surprise to you and us, how the BJP and their Hindutva outfit, how they behave. You know, RSS was responsible for the killing of Gandhi. And if they are blaming Nehru, it is only natural that they would do that. They have been an extremist outfit ever since their beginning. Now, unfortunately, the problem is that within the last, say, 70 years, all this thing that they had been injecting in people's minds, it has now, now the chicken has come home to roost, as they say. That is the issue. If you look at the Prime Minister of India, Modi, he is a lifelong member of RSS. And what is the RSS ideology? They want to cleanse India of all non-Hindus. So be it the Christians and be it the whatever. So you might have noticed that just recently, there was forced conversion even of the Christians to Hinduism. So this is how they are going ahead. They want to convert everybody to Hinduism. This is their policy, and they will not spare anything. They will not leave any stone unturned. To me, in my view, they will go ahead with the implementation of their charter full throttle.
Mr. Zamir, please hold your thought over here. Back to you with more discussion. We have been joined now by Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmad, a professor in international relations. Thank you for your time on the show. After the startling revelations by Ghulam Nabi Azad, this was exactly which was pointed out by Prime Minister Imran Khan during his speech, that the correlation between the RSS ideology to Nazism and fascism. And Ghulam Nabi Azad has revealed that all the hotels and guest houses in Indian occupied Kashmir have turned into prisons. What do you have to say? So those warnings and the fears by Prime Minister are coming true.
In the past nearly 2 months, the lockdown of Kashmiri people by the racist, supremacist regime of Modi in India, there is a universal consensus, be it the think tanks globally, the political leaders, that this is unprecedented human rights violations conducted by the Indian regime. Now, of course, as the point was being made by your previous guest, this is all a part of a superior Aryan race that RSS and its political wing, namely the BJP, subscribes to. Guru Golwalkar, back in the 40s, it is one of their ideologues, writes in his book that India will be only for one jati. And the concept of jati was that one race, it is Hindu race. The rest will be given 2 options, either to convert to Hinduism or to leave India, migrate from India. So this is precisely being reflected in Kashmir in the past nearly 2 months, and unfortunately, this might be the trend in the next 5 years of the second regime of Modi in India.
Okay, Mr. Yasir, as Ghulam Nabi has said, that people are being put into prisons and the entire valley is full of atmosphere where there is fear, where there is terror. And when we correlate this RSS ideology with that of Nazism and fascism, so when we talk about Nazis particularly, the people were put into gas chambers. So do you consider it a systematic ethnic cleansing going on in Indian occupied Kashmir?
Well, this is what the Dole doctrine is, and we have, here in Europe, we have extensively talked about Dole doctrine. So this is what Dole doctrine is. They just want to, do the same thing what the Nazis they did to the Jews in Germany, and at the end, Kashmiris will be a minority, and they are going to create semi colonies because, as you know, there are nearly 1 million Indian security forces stationed in Kashmir. So this is what they will do. So all these, they will get immigrants from all over India, settle them in Kashmir, And tomorrow, they can go to the United Nations and say, okay, come on, we want to do a referendum here, when there would be no Kashmiris left in Kashmir. So right now, I think it is really very important that internationally we do proactive diplomacy. And we have seen after Imran Khan's recent UNGA speech that things have started to move on. I don't know if you are aware of that. A resolution was passed in the Labour Party conference about international intervention, and where they stress upon that Kashmiri should be given the right to self-determination, and there should be a referendum in Kashmir. And after Imran Khan's speech in UNGA, we saw support from Malaysia as well, where they termed Indians as the occupiers. We had support from China and Turkey. And on top of that, the Commissioner for Human Rights has also published a report where they have exposed all the brutalities that has been happening in Kashmir. So yes, I think things have started to move on, but we need a cohesive effort. So whatever is the demand from the people who are incarcerated in Kashmir Valley, that should those voices should be. That's the same thing should happen in Muzaffarabad. They should raise the same slogan. We should come up with one voice, that Kashmiris we stand together, and we should have one collective narrative. That is really very important right now.
Yes, a collective and cohesive effort should be done, which is already being carried out by Pakistan on the political, diplomatic fronts and the moral fronts to raise the Kashmir cause internationally. And a lot of voices from the world leaders are also being raised. Mr. Zamir, Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has categorically, however, rejected, on the other hand, President Trump's mediation offer yesterday. What can the U.S. do in this situation?
The U.S. would only go to the extent that really suits their interest. So I would be very cautious in putting all our eggs in one basket. We should focus on using our influence in other capitals as well. In Europe, in the Middle East, in the Gulf, blah, blah. Although the response so far from the Gulf has been less than forthcoming and less than as expected from Muslim Ummah countries, but nevertheless we should keep working, because if you keep working on these countries bilaterally, they may bilaterally raise the issue with Indians if they don't do it, publicly. We should also keep sort of requesting the U.S. to use their influence with India, but I would be sort of very cautious not to expect too much from there. So we should be working in all European capitals and other capitals also.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Mr. Tariq, former ambassador, joining us from Islamabad. Mr. Yasir, as Mr. Zamir has also pointed out, and you were also saying that the voice for the Kashmiris have been raised by Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi as well. But on the other hand, S. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister of India, has said that these leaders don't have the complete understanding of the issue. What do you have to say about it?
I think someone needs to tell Mr. Jaishankar that I think he does not know about what he's talking about, because on the 16th August meeting of Security Council, they just put India's claim of bilateral, like it's a bilateral issue, out from the window, because when the security it means it's a dispute and it's a UN mandated issue. So whatever he's saying, I don't agree with him.
So when he speaks, he also spoken of the bilateral discussion. There were two contrary statements given by S. Jaishankar yesterday. He, on the one hand, declined the mediation offer of US President Donald Trump, and he said the revocation of Article 370 was an India's internal matter. On the other hand, he also said that it can be discussed bilaterally. So when he talks about discussing this bilaterally, then similar accord comes into operation, which is a bilateral agreement and puts a limit on any unilateral action on Kashmir. But once it has been violated, even though India, how can they talk about discussing the issue bilaterally, and particularly Pakistan, when has refused after such a provocative move by Indian government?
Well, to be really very honest with you, to us Kashmiris, we know all we want is the implementation, and what it means to us all the Security Council resolutions. There are more than 13 Security Council resolutions. That matters to us, And I'm not a constitutional expert, but the constitutional experts are saying since after the revocation of Article 370, it's not an internal matter. The bilateralism and the Schwemlein Accord is gone. So it's null and void now. So if Kashmir needs to be discussed, it needs to be discussed in accordance with the United Nations Security Council resolutions.
So after the unilateral action by government, the similar accord is no more into operation and the issue has become international. Mr. Yasir Ahmed, Director of South Asia Center for Peace and Human Rights and editor and founder of KashmirInsider.com, joining us from London. I'll move to Mr. Dr. Ishtiaq. What do you think after the raising of voice by international leaders at the UNGA? Would the United Nations finally realize that the narrative which has been created by Indian government, led by BJP, is all false?
Well, you see, the thing is, we need to understand that these days, apart from the traditional power structures which were based upon, states, big, small, superpowers, there is an equally vibrant force which is the international public opinion, especially in the age of digital media, social media. So ever since they have revoked these articles, whether these articles were there or they are not there, it doesn't matter to us. It is immaterial for Pakistan because we focus on the legitimate right to self-determination of the Kashmiri people, which is enshrined in the UN Security Council resolutions. So, but what has happened in the last nearly 2 months is that the international public opinion is solidly behind the Kashmiri people and the voices that we raise in their support all along, all these years and decades. This is very important. So if we presume that international public opinion is a force to reckon with, then obviously apart from the traditional means of diplomacy,
international opinion seems to be at the back of the innocent Kashmiris who are struggling for their right to self-determination. Thank you for your time, Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmad, for being with us on the show today, Professor in International Relations. Here we take a short break. After we return, we will discuss US-Iran current relationship and Iran's support for the Houthis' offer of a ceasefire to Saudi Arabia. Stay with us. We'll be back in a bit. Welcome back to Newswire. The U.S. media has reported that Iran's President Hassan Rouhani refused to take U.S. President Donald Trump's call arranged by French President Emmanuel Macron on the sidelines of the 74th UNGA. Iran has repeatedly rejected negotiations with the U.S. until the U.S. complies with the 2015 nuclear accord and lifts unilateral sanctions. Iran says that the U.S. policy of maximum pressure is turning into maximum begging as well. Tensions between the US and Iran escalated after 2 major Saudi oil installations were hit by drones, the responsibility of which was claimed by Yemen's Houthi rebels. Iran has supported Yemen's Houthi rebels' offer of ceasefire to Saudi Arabia as well. On the other hand, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has said that war with Iran will lead to a total collapse of global economy, calling for a peaceful settlement with Tehran. To understand all this, we are joined by Mr. Schwemlein, former senior advisor to the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan at the U.S. Department of State in our Islamabad studios, Mr. Mostafa Khoshcheshm, analyst joining us from Tehran, and Mr. Szamuely, Middle East expert from Budapest. Thank you for being a part of the show, all of you today. I will start the discussion with you, Mr. James. Reports are coming from the U.S. that Iranian President Hassan Rouhani refused a phone conversation with the U.S. President Trump arranged by French President Emmanuel Macron. Earlier, U.S. President had said that he doesn't want war with Iran. Can you shed some light on the dynamics of the current relationship between the two countries?
Sure. So 2 years ago, President Trump took as his first decision in office a withdrawal from the multilaterally negotiated Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear agreement between the P5+1 and Iran. That step was incredibly provocative to Iran. It's what you called a unilateral action by the United States. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has been trying to intermediate between the two to reduce tensions. President Trump seems to have two instincts. On the one hand, he himself has made clear that he doesn't want war with Iran. On the other hand, he's taken actions that to withdraw from this international agreement that were provocative to Iran. Just last week, as you mentioned, whether it's Iranian-backed Houthi militias in Yemen, or as has been attributed by the United States, cruise missiles launched from Iranian territory, two Saudi refineries were hit, affecting global oil supplies, and that ultimate responsibility goes back to Iran. This is a moment of high tension for sure.
Okay, Mr. Mostafa, I'll come to you. Iran has continuously said that there will be no negotiations until the 2015 accord is complied with and unilateral sanctions against Iran are lifted. Do you see any sort of flexibility on the part of the U.S. regarding any of these demands in light of the report that has just emerged about President Trump, who kept on waiting for the phone call to talk to President Rouhani, and President Rouhani refused that one?
Well, hello, and thanks for having me. As a matter of fact, I believe Donald Trump is wrongly still thinking, that his present course of policy, sanctions, and somehow military threats or other pressures that they have tried to lay on Iran would work. But he eventually desires a photo op in order to help his presidential campaign for the next year's election. Also, what he wants is not negotiation talks or a deal. What he wants is a zero-sum deal in which the U.S. would receive all the concessions without giving any concessions. What he wants is a meeting and talks under much pressure to force Iran to surrender. So Tehran would never agree to that. Talks are meant to give diplomacy a chance to end up in a deal. We already have a deal in place, and Iran has been in full compliance according to the IAEA and Europeans and even American officials. So Iran believes that if there needs to be any chance for diplomacy to work, we already have a deal in place, and they could get back to the nuclear deal and start talks. So that's the best option. I believe Donald Trump still is sticking to his course of policy of sanctions and pressure into Iran, but soon, in about probably 2 to 3 months max, he will come to realize that the sanctions and his present course of maximum campaign pressure is not working well, and he would ease some of the pressures in return for some kind of talk through some kind of tactical retreat. That's my assessment, of course.
You say that within it will take a couple of next months for him to realize, and he would come to easing a couple of or some sanctions on Iran. But on the other hand, we have seen Iran's Defense Minister, Brigadier General Amir Hatami, has said that U.S. policy of maximum pressure is turning into maximum begging, and they beg us to talk with them once again. How do you see this statement?
As I said, yes, Trump is moving heaven and earth in order to have a photo op with Iranian officials to give himself some kind of credit in area of foreign policy where he has failed with regard to the Chinese, Russians, to the North Koreans. Even North Koreans said yesterday that they are desperate and they are disappointed at talks with the United States after all those hues and cries and media hype about the meetings between the two sides' leaders. So under the present circumstances where Donald Trump is thinking of only a zero-sum game and deal, as he is actually very much demanding to have such a meeting with Iranian president. But what I said pertains to when Donald Trump grows a little wise and understands that the present formula, the zero-sum game, would never work with Iran. The sanctions would not push Tehran to the top, and he needs to change approach and strategy. Only when he would start some kind of tactical retreat in order to, convince Iranians to start some kind of talks within the framework of 5+1 and under the nuclear deal, of course.
Mr. Mostafa Khoshcheshm, thank you for being part of Newswire today. Analyst joining us from Tehran. Mr. George, how do you see this statement from Iran that U.S. maximum pressure policy is turning into maximum begging? Do you consider it as a victory of the Iranian policy towards the U.S., particularly at this point in time?
Well, a victory, I think, is a little strong. Certainly, the U.S. maximum pressure policy has utterly failed, largely because the United States had exaggerated the support that this policy would enjoy for the rest of the world, while the United States had calculated correctly that the European partners, the European participants in the JCPOA would be pretty much on board with the U.S. policy, or at least they wouldn't do anything in order to undercut the maximum pressure sanctions policy. What the United States had not counted on was the extent of the help that Russia and China would provide for Iran. And now we have Turkey as well saying that they will continue to purchase oil from Iran. It means that Iran will survive. The maximum pressure policy will not bring Iran to its knees. And if it starts getting into a situation of military confrontations, tanker wars, or whatever, Iran will come out the winner.
Mr. James, I'll come to you with this particular point. So is the situation and the position of U.S. President Donald Trump very much vulnerable? Neither he doesn't want to go into war with Iran, nor he is expected to ease or give the concessions regarding the unilateral sanctions he has imposed on Iran.
Well, I think the best plausible outcome from where we are today is a return to the terms of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action of a couple years ago in some rebranded form. Call it a Trump nuclear deal. I don't think anyone should particularly worry about the branding. But I mean, I'm of the view, and I think many foreign policy experts in the United States are of the view, that it was a mistake for the U.S. administration to walk away from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action 2 years ago. And now probably the most likely, best plausible outcome available is a return to that agreement. I'd say that I think it was a tactical mistake, and it is a tactical mistake for Foreign Minister Zarif and President Rouhani to decline attempts by the international community, like the French president, to intermediate and kind of negotiate a path back into talks where the United States, where the Trump administration, which has been belligerent on these issues, comes back to the table. I think it was a mistake for Iran to reject that and then to mock the president of the United States, a man who doesn't tend to respond to those that kind of behavior very maturely, to be fair. So personally, I hope we can get back to a nuclear agreement. The region was safer when we had the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in place. I hope we can get back there and we can focus on, I think, the really important issues going forward, issues like Iran's regional behavior, and that continues to be destabilizing towards its neighbors. So
you consider it a tactical mistake on the part of the Iranians to having rejected the offer of discussions and negotiations with the U.S. Do you think Saudi Arabia should have accepted this ceasefire offer, and now, particularly when it is backed by Iran as well, it has supported and also said that it regrets that Saudi Arabia didn't accept this offer. Do you think there is any chance Saudi Arabia will accept this offer, and if it accepts this offer, will it help ease broader tensions in the region?
I don't know enough about this particular Houthi group that issued this initial offer, but I'm hopeful that the Saudis will find a way off of this pedestal. Certainly, there's evidence that their allies in the region who have been supporting this conflict on their side seem to also share the opinion that it's time for the conflict to end. Again, though, I think Iran's kind of provocative, aggressive Twitter diplomacy on this is counterproductive. I think, honestly, Iran is backing the Houthis for sure, but if the Saudis are going to find a way out of this, and I hope they do, I don't think Iran gloating about it is particularly helpful.
UN had earlier hailed the ceasefire offer by the Houthis, and it was also commended by UN Chief Mr. Antonio Guterres. How do you think the UN can play its role in bringing different parties to the negotiating table, especially in Yemen?
I think exactly what you just said. I hope the UN can bring the parties to the negotiating table to negotiate a ceasefire and a series of steps to build confidence and lead to peace. These processes typically start with localized ceasefires like we recently saw around port facilities in Yemen. That ceasefire broke down, unfortunately. I hope the UN can continue in its efforts and push ahead, because ultimately this war, there's not a doubt, needs to end. Certainly in the United States, there's broad bipartisan consensus reflected in Congress that the Trump administration's approach to this has been too slow to come to the point that we need to pressure to end the conflict.
Mr. George, there are certain reports of the UN have revealed the catastrophic humanitarian crisis unfolding in Yemen. A lot of lives have been lost and the people are in dire need of food and medical care. What role do you think UN can play to ease the tensions in Yemen?
The United States can just simply back away and allow the United Nations to facilitate some kind of a peace accord. And this would be supported right across the board. I mean, this would be supported by the other permanent members of the Security Council, including Russia and China. So this is one of those cases in which I don't think the United States is going to stand in the way of United Nations resolution. So here, I think I am more hopeful for some kind of a resolution of the conflict in Yemen than I am in the resolution of the conflict between the United States and Iran.
But you think they are both interconnected. And here is the scenario. If the Saudis accept the ceasefire offer by the Houthis, and then there could be a little bit of easing of tensions between Saudis and Iran.
There could be. On the other hand, while this policy of maximum pressure continues against Iran, and Iran is committed to the policy that if Iran cannot export its oil, then nobody else from the Persian Gulf will be able to export its oil. So there will continue to be tension. Iran simply will not tolerate effectively a blockade of its oil exporting capacities. So the only way that can happen is if the United States, at the very least, even if it doesn't return to the JCPOA, eases up on the sanctions that it's imposed in recent months. I don't see that happening, so I don't think there's going to be very much easing of tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Mr. George Szamuely, thank you very much for being part of Newswire today, Middle East expert joining us from Budapest. Mr. James, this scenario, how do you take this scenario if Saudis accept the offer by the Houthis and there could be a little bit of ease in tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran? Could there be any possibility that Saudi Arabia could impress upon the US to give some concession regarding the unilateral actions on Iran?
I would say that I think it's unlikely that the sequence of events that you described lay out. I wish that Saudi Arabia and Iran could figure out a way to at least come to an understanding that helps to stabilize the Gulf region. But even if issues are resolved in Yemen and the conflict can come to a conclusion, I'm not optimistic that the underlying structure and ideological tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran will be resolved. And I'm even less convinced that any resolution of the Yemen conflict will contribute to a change in this tense status that we find between the United States and Iran. I do think that conversely, I do think what the Yemen conflict has done is drive a real wedge between Saudi Arabia and the United States. There's broad-based political, I think, and growing political frustration now dating back decades with Saudi Arabia and the United States. I don't know how that's resolved. Certainly, Saudi Arabia has been an important historic partner of the United States in the region, and as the previous caller mentioned, Saudi Arabia does purchase, large weapons from the United States and other countries as part of that relationship. So I don't know if ultimately these tensions will be resolved. I will point out, though, that U.S. dependency on oil from the Middle East is in decline. As a country, the United States is increasingly self-sufficient. We are ultimately less likely to stay engaged in these kind of regional conflicts in this region as our dependency on oil flows diminishes. I hope the region can come to the table and help reduce the tensions.
So you are of the view, due to ideological differences between Iran and Saudi Arabia, easing of tensions seems to take a long road. Mr. James Schwemlein joining us from our Islamabad studios. Thank you for your time. Former senior advisor to the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan at the U.S. Department of State. And that's all from Newswire today. We will see you tomorrow with more in-depth analysis on the latest happenings from around the globe. Till then, it's goodbye.